Morning. Merry Christmas. Look at all these people. I was expecting 7 people. Staff, our spouses, and Steve Schragi. For the record, Steve is here. Well, Christmas is a time for many things. It's a time for traditions. It's a time for singing. It's a time for family, for decorations. But also Christmas is a time for stories. For some reason, we all go into storytelling mode at Christmas. We go see Christmas movies. We watch Christmas specials on television. Did anybody watch The Sound of Music last night? That's a tradition on at least CBS or whatever. We sit around and we read Christmas stories to children. Christmas is a time for stories. What Christmas stories am I talking about? Well, you know some of our most famous Christmas stories. Charles Dickens wrote what? Christmas Carol, which remains one of our most enduring Christmas tales. My family grew up reading The Night Before Christmas on Christmas Eve. At least that one year we did that. And every year, millions of theater goers march down to the Fox to go see The Nutcracker and the Mouse King, which was first written as a children's Christmas story. And how many of us know The Gift of the Magi? Let me read that story growing up about a young, impoverished couple who sacrifice, like the Magi, to buy each other Christmas gifts. Or if we didn't grow up quite that cultured, perhaps we watched the Charlie Brown Christmas special and watched the Peanuts gang decorate their pathetic little Christmas tree. Or maybe we watched the stop animation story of Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer fleeing from the abominable snowman. Or there are more religious Christmas stories, like the little drummer boy who has no gift to bring the king except his rhythm. Or there is the nativity story itself, the first of all great Christmas stories about a child born secretly in Bethlehem who would grow up to rule the universe. These are some great Christmas stories. Of course, I'll share with you my favorite Christmas story, Die Hard. Die Hard tells the story of an office Christmas party gone terribly wrong, when a terrorist group calling themselves Asian Dawn breaks into the Nakatomi Plaza Tower. Only the scrappy rescue efforts of a New York City cop named John McClane can save their Christmas party from the pagan terrorists. Yippee-ki-yay, and we'll let it stop there. Now I have a machine gun. Ho, ho, ho. Remember that? Christmas is a time of stories. The great Christmas stories get passed down and retold, illustrated and adapted. This morning, though, I want to tell you about a lesser-known Christmas story. There are no shepherds. There are no reindeer. There are no presents. There are children, but not in the way you think. By contemporary measures, this story would not be published and nobody would put it to song with costumes and dancing, but it might be one of the first Christmas stories to ever take place. It just might be the greatest Christmas story never told. The story is told in the Old Testament book of Isaiah, chapter 7. It takes place around 735 BC. A lonely king named Ahaz is inspecting his aqueduct, which carries water into the city of Jerusalem. Ahaz is nervous. His nation, Judah, with his capital in Jerusalem, has just been attacked by their neighbors, Israel and Aram. Israel used to be part of Judah but broke away many years ago. Now they're trying to bully Judah around and take Judah's land and cities and resources. They've already teamed up to attack Judah once, but Ahaz's armies pushed them back. Ahaz knows they're coming again, though. They have already said they will. So as Ahaz gazes out over his aqueducts, he has a decision to make. He could keep fighting Aram and Israel, hoping to defeat or outlast them, or he could make a phone call. He could call up the king of Assyria. Now, Assyria is the big new kid on the block. They are a great nation to the north with a nasty appetite for other nations. Their king even has a nasty-sounding name. The king's name of Assyria is Tiglath-Pileser III. The world needed a third. Tiglath-Pileser the first and second and the third. Tiglath-Pileser III. Ahaz could offer to make an alliance with Tiglath-Pileser III, who had the power to protect Judah from their enemies, Israel and Aram. Of course, if he did this, he'd have to make tribute to Assyria. He and his armies would have to fight Assyrian wars. He'd have to empty his treasury into theirs. He might even have to worship their gods. And as Ahaz surveys his city and the land God had given them, he doesn't quite know what to do. Then, out of nowhere, a figure appears by the aqueduct, a bearded man with a staff. Ahaz recognizes him. "Hi, Isaiah," Ahaz mutters. "We meet again," Isaiah responds. Now, Isaiah is a Hebrew prophet. Ahaz has met him a few times before. Ahaz doesn't much like the prophet Isaiah. He's always just showing up. He's always getting past Ahaz's secretary and security detail. Plus, Isaiah always has a word from God about what a terrible job Ahaz is doing, and if Ahaz would just repent, everything would be fine. Like in the old days when David ruled the country, and here he is again. "What terrible thing have I done now, Isaiah?" No. Isaiah insists, "I'm not that kind of prophet. I'm here to help you." "Help me? With what?" Ahaz pretends not to know what he's talking about. "With your situation." "What situation?" Ahaz is enjoying the charade. Prophets are very sensitive and irritable figures. It's fun to get under their skin. "Oh, stop this," Isaiah charges. "You know the situation. You pushed back Aram and Israel, but you know they're coming again, and you know you can't keep this up forever. You're considering allying with Assyria to ward off the threat, but you know that getting in bed with the Assyrians will reduce Judah to a puppet client state and subject us to the whims of brutal pagan overlords. That's the situation. I'm here because God has told me what you should do about your situation." "And what, pray tell, should we do?" Ahaz does not try to conceal his patronizing tone. The prophet pauses. He inhales through his nose. "Nothing." "Nothing," the king blurts out. "Nothing." "How nothing?" "They're doing something," the king screams back. "They're getting ready to attack, to take control of our city and people. You want me to do nothing?" The king was incredulous. Isaiah was not intimidated by the king's outburst and was waiting for the opportunity. "Yes, do nothing. This is what the Lord has told me to tell you. Be careful, keep calm, don't be afraid. Do not lose heart because of these two smoldering stubs of firewood, because of the fierce anger of Aram and Israel. Aram and Israel have plotted your ruin, saying, 'Let us invade Judah. Let us tear it apart and divide it among ourselves.' But this is what the sovereign Lord says. It will not take place. It will not happen. Aram and Israel will be shattered. If you do not stand firm in your faith, you will not stand at all." Ahaz weighs the prophet's words. "You're telling me," he asks, "that Israel and Aram will not attack?" Isaiah jumps on the question. "Not only am I telling you they won't attack, but I'm telling you not to call Assyria because you really don't want to do that. You really don't want to make an alliance with that nation. In fact, if you doubt me and what I say, do this. Ask the Lord for a sign. Ask God to prove my words with a sign. Whether a sign from the deepest depths or the highest heights, ask God right here, right now, to prove what I say is true." Ahaz considers this. "I thought we shouldn't ask for signs. I thought asking for signs was bad." Isaiah snaps back. "You just don't want a sign because you don't want to know if I'm right. Oh, go take your prophetic psychoanalyzing somewhere else," Ahaz blurts back. "Well, whether or not you want a sign," Isaiah responds, "the Lord is going to give you one." He steps forward and widens his eyes in that crazy sort of prophet way he does when getting ready to make an utterance. And then it comes. "Hear now, you house of David," lowers his voice too. "The Lord himself will give you a sign. The virgin will be with child and will give birth to a son, and will call him Emmanuel. He will eat curds and honey when he knows enough to reject the wrong and choose the right. But before the boy knows enough to reject the wrong and choose the right, the land of the two kings you dread will be laid waste. The Lord will bring on you and your people and on the house of your father a time unlike any since Israel broke away from Judah. He will bring the king of Assyria. That's a weird sign. Ahaz responds. So let me get this straight. A young woman who is now a virgin will soon become pregnant and give birth to a son, naming him, what was it again? Emmanuel? Before the boy grows to know the difference between right and wrong, maybe just a few years, Aram and Israel will be destroyed by Assyria, and then Assyria will turn on us. That's your sign? Isaiah snaps back. Well, I told you could ask for a sign, and you didn't, and this is the sign you're getting. But yes, in a few short years, before this woman's child reaches maturity, the enemies you so fear in Israel and Aram will be completely destroyed. You won't have to worry about them then. You don't have to worry about them now. But if you make this deal with Assyria, Assyria will turn on you, and you'll have much, much bigger things to worry about. I don't like this sign. I don't like the sign either, the prophet agrees. But it's going to be okay. How exactly, dear prophet, is it going to be okay? I am surrounded by enemies who want to overtake me, and a crazy man with a beard is telling me to do nothing. How is it going to be okay? Because God will be with us. Isaiah lets it sink in. That's the point of the sign. Emmanuel. It means God will be with us in Hebrew. Don't you know Hebrew? You're speaking it right now. Israel and Aram will be destroyed. Even when Assyria comes against us, God will be with us. He will be with us no matter what. No matter what comes against us, Emmanuel. No matter what battles we win or lose, Emmanuel. No matter how strong our enemies are, Emmanuel. God has always been and always will be with us. Ahaz looks back at his aqueduct. He could not believe that Israel and Aram would be destroyed in a few short years. The prophet couldn't be right. He had to call Assyria. He had to make arrangements. But what if he was right? Did he really want to make an alliance with Assyria against a threat that never came? Was he better off trusting God's ability to protect them from their enemies than forming alliances with pagans? He hadn't trusted God in a long time. Wasn't even sure he believed in God anymore. Regardless, Ahaz had tired of the conversation. The king had made his decision. I have a phone call to make, Ahaz says, staring at the horizon. To Assyria? Isaiah knew the answer. To Assyria. Sure enough, within a handful of years, Assyria descends on both Israel and Aram and wipes them off the map overnight. The nations are never rebuilt. And even with his alliance to Tiglath-Pileser, the great Assyrian Empire eventually sweeps down on Judah, obliterating the countryside, holding Jerusalem captive in foreign subjugation. The nation survives, but barely. Isaiah was right again. And as far as the young mother and her son Emmanuel, we never learn what happens to them. In fact, we don't even know who they are. The mother might have been a member of Ahaz's court. Some people suggest the child might have been Ahaz's own son. We never learn. The young mother and her son, Emmanuel, fade into obscurity until they resurface. Centuries later. For 750 years, the people of God have remained oppressed by overlords. First the Assyrians, then the Babylonians, then the Persians, then the Greeks, then the Romans. All this time, they keep waiting and looking for a king, a Messiah, to restore them to their former glory. Then one year, in a lonely region of Palestine, rumors of the birth of another child begin to swirl. This child is also regarded as a child of prophecy. He's born in Bethlehem, the city of David. Rumor is that he comes from the line of David to sit on the throne of David. Rumor also is that he has been born the Son of God, his father, to a virgin named Mary. And as the people get to know this man, they realize that they have heard this story before. Isaiah the prophet talked about a child to be born of a virgin who would be called God with us. They believed that had happened in Isaiah's day. giving their ancestors hope as their nation fell apart. The Hebrews knew that story, but maybe the story isn't over yet. Maybe the story is happening again in a way even Isaiah hadn't expected. Maybe Isaiah had been prophesying the birth of one child in his day when God was also speaking of a greater child to come. We don't know the name of the young woman who gave birth to Emmanuel in the 8th century, but maybe that doesn't matter because we know the name of the real Emmanuel God always had in mind. This Emmanuel was also born of a virgin. This Emmanuel also grew up to choose the right from the wrong. And the early Christians heard of the birth of Christ, and they realized they had heard this story before from Isaiah, and they began to believe that God was doing it again. It's why the gospel writer Matthew writes in his version of the Christmas story, all this took place to fulfill what the Lord had said through the prophet. The virgin will be with child and will give birth to a son, and they will call him Emmanuel, which means God with us. That's the greatest Christmas story never told. It's the story behind the story. Now, I know it's kind of complicated. Hopefully you followed along. I also know there's a lot of questions to the story. Questions like, who exactly was the virgin of Isaiah's prophecy? Was the virgin an actual virgin when she gave birth, or was she just a young woman who was a virgin when Isaiah gave the prophecy? And who was the boy? How come we never meet him? Also, was Isaiah aware that he was predicting 2 births, not 1? And how come Mary doesn't name Jesus Emmanuel? Was she screwing it up? Wasn't that what she was supposed to do? They shall call him Emmanuel? Those are all good questions. Scholars love to debate and opine on them. But I like the story not just for the questions, but because it helps me understand the real Christmas story all the more. It's like backstory, like The Hobbit, that makes the real story, Lord of the Rings, all the more interesting. And the story of Isaiah's prophecy has a lot of lessons for us that can help us understand the birth of Christ all the more. I have 3 lessons that I want to share with you from the greatest Christmas story never told. For example, here's one of the lessons of Isaiah's prophecy. We don't need Assyria. We don't need pagan overlords. This was Ahaz's temptation. He felt pressure from every direction. Israel was coming down on him. Aram was coming down on him. Ahaz was a politician, a protector, a commander. He figured he needed some help. He feared annihilation if he didn't get some help. Isaiah tried to tell him he didn't need any help. Israel and Aram were nothing but smoldering stubs. Remember his advice. Be careful, keep calm, don't be afraid. Do not lose heart because of these 2 smoldering stubs of firewood. They are matches that have been burnt out. Do nothing. Don't be afraid of things that aren't really that scary. Trust God. And don't call Assyria. Don't make the phone call. Isaiah tells him to stand in faith. If you do not stand firm in your faith, he says, you will not stand at all. The people in Jesus' day were tempted to make the same compromise. They were being oppressed by the Romans. Some of them had given in. Herod, for example, King Herod. You know King Herod. Yeah. He was the king in Jesus' day. He had given up waiting for the Messiah and agreed to cooperate with the Romans for protection and money. But we do this too. We get really afraid of things that aren't really that scary. We get afraid of people in situations that are no more scary than smoldering stubs, matches that have burnt out. We get scared of bills not getting paid. We get scared of people who are mean to us. We get scared of loneliness. We get scared of sickness and death. These things just aren't that frightening. They're just smoldering stubs, but we get so frightened that we call up Assyria for help we don't need. If we're lonely, we'll date someone who we know is bad for us. If we're broke, we'll go into debt on a credit card. If we're frustrated, we'll get drunk or go online for a shot of pornography. This is called calling Assyria. Calling Assyria when you don't need to. And although it gives us temporary relief, it always comes back to bite us in the end. We don't need to fear smoldering stubs, and we don't need help from pagan overlords. That's the first lesson of the story. Secondly, God can bring us through. We'll never really know how Ahaz's situation would have been different if he had trusted God more and not partnered with Assyria. We'll never really know how history would have played out. Maybe Assyria would have never invaded. We'll never know. But it's almost beside the point, because the point of the prophecy is that no matter what might come, God was with Ahaz and his people. The meaning of Emmanuel isn't God will be with you to solve your problems. The meaning of Emmanuel is God will be with you no matter what. Even later, Isaiah tries to drive this point home. In the next chapter, he's elaborating on the destruction to come to Judah by Assyria when they finally arrive. It will be worse, Isaiah writes, when they finally arrive than anyone could imagine. Here's actually what he writes in chapter 8. He says, "Because this people of Judah have rejected me, therefore the Lord is about to bring against them the mighty floodwaters of the river. The king of Assyria with all his pomp, Tiglath-Pileser III." It's a pompy name. "It will overflow all its channels, run over all its banks, and sweep on into Judah, swirling over it, passing through it, reaching up to the neck. Its outspread wings will cover the breadth of your land. O Emmanuel." In other words, the king of Assyria will come against you like a river rising to your neck. You will wonder if you are going to drown. You will be completely swamped. He will descend on you like a bird of prey, covering your land with his wings. But he is still with us. He will still be with us. O God, Emmanuel. The message of Christianity has never been that God will take away our problems. The promise has been that he will never leave us as we suffer through them. This is why he came to earth. He came so that we could know that. He came to suffer like we do. He came to endure childhood like we do. He came to get sick like we do. He came to die like we do by our side. He came to bring us through life, not to get us out of it. God can bring us through. And thirdly, we have hope for the future. One of the really interesting things about the prophet Isaiah is that he's always employing children in his prophecies. This child, Emmanuel, isn't the only time he includes a child in his prophecies. In fact, I didn't tell you this in the retelling, but even in appearing at the aqueduct to Ahaz, God tells him to bring his child with him. Here's the moment. "Then the Lord said to Isaiah, 'Go out, you and your son Shear-Jashub, to meet Ahaz at the end of the aqueduct.'" The name of the prophet's son, Shear-Jashub, means "a remnant shall return." It's a reminder that whatever will happen to the people of God, some people will survive. And even later in the story, Isaiah introduces another child. God tells him to go have another child. So he goes to his wife and he has another child. And here's what the Lord tells him to name this child. "And the Lord said to me, name him Maher-Shalal-Hashbaz." It's Hebrew. They would laugh at our names too. But the name Maher-Shalal-Hashbaz means quick to the plunder, swift to the spoil. It's a reminder, it's a promise to Ahaz that Assyria is coming to plunder Judah's enemies. Even Isaiah knows that all this prophetic childbearing is significant. He understands. He says this later in chapter 8. He says, "Here am I, and the children the Lord has given me. We are signs and symbols from the Lord Almighty, who dwells on Mount Zion." So some preachers like to use visual aids, and some prophets like to bear children and give them interesting names. In fact, I've decided in this vein to rename my children. Sign up for a small group. Make Rooftop your church home. I have 3 children, so the third one, Give to the Capital campaign. Just to make the point. My wife will keep her name. For now. What I think is noteworthy about this is what God was communicating through these children by the fact that they were children. Think about it. The people of Judah were facing annihilation. They were terrified that their nation might be coming to an end. Israel was about to be destroyed, its people killed off. What would be the fate of Judah? They had reason to fear. But then a child is born. What is a child but hope for the future? Carl Sandburg once said, "A baby is God's opinion that the world should go on." Similarly, imagine what it was like to be a first-century Jew living in Jesus' day in Palestine. For nearly 800 years, your people had been living in an occupied state. At any moment, your overlords could march in and wipe you out. But then, a baby is born. And a special child at that. A child they are calling Emmanuel. One who knows right from wrong and will make all things right. You don't know when this will be. You don't know how this child will do that. You don't know what it will be like. You never know these things at the beginning of a child's life. But the child has still been born. There's hope for our nation. He will grow up. He will figure it out. The world will go on. This is our hope on Christmas. We never know what we're going to face in life. We never know if we'll survive one day to the next. We don't know how long we will live, how long our church will survive. We don't know if our marriages will make it. We don't know if our loved one will survive cancer. We just don't know. But a child has been born. Life will go on. And not just any child, Emmanuel, God with us. The child who gives us strength to get us through anything, if not out of it. The child who is enough for us so we don't need Assyrian partners who will just make us miserable in the long run. This child is Christ the King. This child is Emmanuel. He came as God with us. He is with us still. He always will be. That's the greatest Christmas story never told. But now you've heard it. Let's pray.